Welcome to Code and Concrete, the leading podcast for prop tech, conversations about the built environment, and other exciting innovations. If you learn something new, please consider following and leaving a positive review. Enjoy. Hey folks, I've got a return guest here. We've got Robert Orozco on the phone right now. He's been on episodes 23 and I think 27. Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but
I was one of the earlier ones.
Yeah, you were one of the OGs to the show, but you have phenomenal insights. We've talked about data, we've talked about AI agents, and we're going to be talking about some verification and blockchain and different use cases there today. Let's catch up to speed. What have you been doing for the past 6 months? Because I always feel like you're doing something new. You've got some new credential. You're in a new organization. What's the scoop?
It's very fair. I've been doing a lot of AI consulting. I actually just started a role, I think 2 months ago, with the University of Whitewater, Wisconsin. I'm their executive and resident on AI.
Nice.
And help build out and deploy AI in their college, and then helping advise some of their higher level students, like some of their people going for doctorates or some of their master's programs. I'm also going to be doing some educational sessions. I just did one that was called The Pace of AI. How can I possibly keep up? Because I feel like even with this being my primary career, it's hard for me to keep track of everything that's going on in AI. After that, I've been working with a number of organizations. One of them is PillPoll, which is an AI integrated polling firm. Right now, they're very excited now that the midterms are coming up. So what they do is they help take people's direct text answers and break them out into demographic and insight information. There's another one named Afirmity, where the core focus of it is to create RAG systems that are programmatically generated from employees' interactions, contents, emails, teams, chats, and files, so that if an employee is to leave the organization, you are left with a chatbot that can answer questions even though that employee is no longer there.
So it essentially catches everyone up to speed on that person's past work so that you don't have some big pause in terms of operations, like you have continuity, you don't get sidetracked.
Exactly. Yeah, so if someone's working on a project and they leave, you could say, hey, where are they in this project?
Gotcha.
Well, last interaction with their customer. This also is great for onboarding. So if someone leaves and you bring on a new person for the role, they're able to interact with the chatbot to get an understanding of where that person was in that role to help them get up to speed quicker.
Right. Well, that element of continuity is huge. I use that term when talking about assets and information in real estate, because there's always this problem where you are not sure who the previous people were, what work got done, and then even if you do have access to information, you're not entirely sure that it's accurate, which is a really good segue into the first question that I wanted to ask about verification, because your startup, Afirmity, and I don't think we've really gone and done a segment on what it does. So maybe we'll start there, what Afirmity is, but why you are using blockchain for verification second.
Absolutely. So the reason we're going with blockchain is because blockchain at its core is the only trustable media we really have. There is not a better system of trust for transactions or information than a blockchain technology, plain and simple.
Why is that?
Databases can be altered, hacked, even if you have logging. The way they're designed is they're still just software on a computer. And especially now that we're entering the era where people are leveraging AI for malicious use and hacking, I think that the environment of the database will be extraordinarily impacted. I mean, look at data leaks for the last 10 years. Everyone's talking about, hey, we can, this system's been hacked. We've pulled out your data. Give us a ransom of a few $1 million. You can have your data back. I think that that's going to increase with agentic coding, because what used to be called script kiddies, which was malicious hackers that just used application scripts, will now have a smart tool that is more robust, more capable of malicious use. And so I think cybersecurity is going to be very impactful, and having data stored on a blockchain means it is fully trustable and verifiable. You're not going to lose databases. One of the funniest examples of this, ironically, is when I was growing up, we had MySpace.
Mm-hmm.
So before Facebook, we used to have our little social media. They weren't great on security, but during their migration, they lost, I think, 12 years of social media content just because of the way they were doing the data transition, and it failed. And you can never have that with the blockchain technology. And I think that's going to be absolutely critical for tracking transactions. If you think anything that requires real auditing, blockchain makes the most sense. Anything that regards, financial assets, anything regarding business. And I think what we're going to go into is social media as a whole needing blockchain technology integrated, which is what Affirmity does. Affirmity is an immutable media platform so that you can certify the authenticity of content. There's already some content authenticity programs going out. One is C2PA. It's an international conglomerate of intellectuals, professors, business leaders building out a verification program, and they are using a blockchain technology. They're actually doing hashing and then putting those hashes on the blockchain. I have a slight disagreement with that. I think when it comes to visual media, like videos, you need more of a robust system of saving. Hashing is absolutely great for text documents, application files. Like you want to make sure an application that you're uploading has never been altered. And hash checks are a really consistent use case of that. And it's very easy to put a hash of an application on a blockchain.
Well, let's open up some of these technical terms. So
Yeah.
we're using blockchains to verify information and media, and it sounds like there's a couple different ways to do that. One is storing the media directly on the blockchain, and the alternative is keeping the information off of a blockchain, but essentially anchoring it or giving it some sort of digital fingerprint using a blockchain.
Absolutely.
And the second portion, the latter, the anchor, the digital fingerprint, we call that a hash. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. So hashing is just taking the entire application file and its bytes, and then there's an algorithmic process you can do that results in a hash. It's the same way that you secure passwords. So if you enter a password, the reason that your any website never gives you your password back when you go to recovery, it makes you write a new one, is what it does is you enter a password, they hash it. You're given a hash value. And all it is math that only goes really one direction. And so that's the way that security works is we take a piece of text, whether that's a password or a whole contract. We create a hash value from it, which is basically just math on the bytes of the application, and you're given a result number. And the way they do password verification is saying, hey, I'm going to type in your password, I'm going to do that math, and I should get the same result. If I get a different result, I know that you put in the wrong password. It's the same way that they can't give you your password back is because they don't know what it is. That's kind of the high trust aspect of passwords. Now, there's efforts to brute force them, which is where you get kind of some of the data leaks that you see where it's like, oh, your password was exposed. It simply means you most likely had a very simple password. There's people running computers all over the world trying to crack passwords. But the more complex you have, the harder it is to do, which is why very robust documents like contracts are so valuable to put on hashes. Because when it comes to a contract, that contract should be static, stable. It's an extraordinarily long text document. So if you look at the math of creating it and replicating it, what they do is they brute force it. So it'd be like ABC, et cetera to Z, 1 through 10. It's one of those. Now we'll add 2 digits. Now we'll add 3 digits. Now we'll add 4 digits, on and on. And so when it comes to a contract, you're looking at thousands of pieces of data that you have to randomly generate. The likelihood of a collision on that is so significant or insignificant that it's a really great way to store values for documents. The only difference I have when it comes to digital media is it runs into the same problem. You can create a hash on a video, but if you trim a video or if you crop a video to a different size, if you add any sort of filtering, that alters the hash because it changes the underlying file. That's why I've been a big advocate for whole media when it comes to visual media. But when it comes to documents or telemetry data, that's perfectly valuable to store as a hash on a blockchain.
Got it. Well, let's talk about some of those use cases. I frequently bring up the built environment and all of the different people, the paperwork, the file types, and then above that, the governance of those elements, whether that's standards, frameworks, policy, regulators. And so there's this expectation of enforcement. And when there is some sort of consequence that comes with the enforcement, have you done this job correctly? Is this number accurate? Are we being honest with each other? It introduces these areas where maybe something could be manipulated so that you get a desirable outcome. For example, if a property is deemed non-compliant, is there some way that we could forge a certificate to make the property look like it's compliant? And maybe that's safety codes or having properly conducted a transaction of ownership, think title fraud. So there's all of these different things, and you want to make sure that you don't get hit with a $1 million fine or you face jail time. And this has been a very prominent issue in these old school legacy industries, whether that's real estate and infrastructure, supply chain, even healthcare, where big consequences introduces areas where people are going to search for arbitrage. So, how do you see the use of blockchain technology as a remedy for some of these legacy issues? What did they get wrong? Even as they digitize, why is that not good enough? And how are we starting to navigate a better form of verification?
Well, I think the same problem that you have when you're looking up a news story, you look up a story about a event that happened on the news, and you're going to find 27 different articles, all at different times, all with different amounts of information. Right? The thing that happened yesterday is very different than the thing that happened 2 weeks ago. So as you're searching these, you're left with these individual artifacts that are all different components of information. The huge value of blockchain is that it is a traceability tool. You know exactly when it was placed on, what it contained. And so when it comes to things like contracts or, regulatory docs, that's fantastic. You know when it was posted, what it contained, and you can verify it very quickly. It comes down to the problem of too many places where too many things could be stored. And so having a place whereas one, single source of truth of verification is an extraordinary value. And the fact that it cannot be altered or modified. I mean, we see YouTubers like Matt Cox, which is the big fraudster, talking about the ways they used to defraud or do title fraud or steal identities. Having a place where you can go and now have those verifications of the reasons those kind of old frauds don't happen now. And I wouldn't even say what they did was a mistake. Sorry, I've been getting over being sick. Um, it's just the technology didn't really exist. And right now we're hitting the point where it's prevalent, it's verified, and it's existed long enough that I think we're going to start seeing more blockchain technology in traditional infrastructure. We've seen that a lot with our current administration, which is much more friendly to blockchain. And internationally, they've been far more friendly about putting real estate documents, transaction logs, anything like those on blockchain technologies. They just make sense. We know there's a company here in Milwaukee that did blockchain component tracking for aerospace components for the Department of Defense. So when it comes to military saying, hey, is this, airplane compliant? Has the maintenance been done correctly? Are the parts still within tolerance or within agreement so we can use them? That's absolutely critical. And even the, U.S. government's starting to use those kind of technologies.
That's really good to see. And those are just examples of legacy industries. Of course, you have financial technology and the uses of blockchain there, which is the same first principles about single source of truth and being able to trust the information, but less about the consequence and more about symmetry, because when people have symmetry of information, they can make decisions. So we should discuss verification and what we really mean by that, because we've talked about taking documents, contracts, data points, and verifying them using a blockchain, but that might not mean what people think it means, because it's not an actual confirmation that the underlying information is accurate. For example, if we colluded on a contract and presented incorrect information, or if a signature was forged, then what we're really verifying with the blockchain is that is an inaccurate or forged document, which
Yeah.
can catch people off guard, because then they'll say, well, if you're verifying an inaccurate document, what is the purpose of the verification? And I fall back on, it's about the commitment and the evidence. What you are doing is creating that traceability back to the original information, whether it's right or wrong. But if we find out in the future that a document is incorrect, if we're going through litigation and we can go back and see that the contract was forged or that the information uploaded was incorrect, we know that at that point of time, that's where the issue originated. So it's about that traceability of the information. not necessarily trying to ensure that the underlying information is 100% accurate, because a blockchain simply cannot do that, but setting in stone the correct or incorrect information so that we can point back to it. Another example is if we're working on a building and someone does their job incorrectly, we may not know at the time that they did their job incorrectly. Now we're going to document it, and that's going to be hashed using a blockchain. So maybe it's a file that they had uploaded, and we can confirm the authenticity of that file. 10 years later, we might look back and say, and neutral to whether it's right or wrong, we could say the problem originated here with the work, and here's the document, here's the data that shows that the work was done incorrectly. We didn't know at the time, but now we can at least trace it back. And if there were any attempts to manipulate that along the line and say that it was done or is done differently, we can look past that. So it's putting that evidence, taking that evidence and setting it in stone, and then you're
No,
going to have accountability.
no, absolutely. You're 100% right to point that out. A lot of people hear verification, they think we've like gone ourselves and checked that the information is accurate. But the interesting dual part of that is, you're right, blockchains are about certifying that what you know at the time is what you know at the time, whether that's accurate or inaccurate. But the interesting thing about that is it creates a huge liability to anyone doing something malicious. It creates a very easily traceable aspect to go back and compare against. And so there is still a benefit, whether it's not an entire all-encompassing benefit, but someone who's trying to commit fraud are always trying to operate in ways that they will not be recorded. So having a system like a blockchain puts them on record at all times. And the farther you get into sensor data, the more accurate information you can store, and you can verify it to be as true as possible. The big thing is yeah, we're certifying that this is what we believe based on the best knowledge we have at this time. And it gives traceability. So like you said, if there's ever a problem later, hey, we, have this grade of concrete supposed to be going into this. We're seeing cracks way too early for the spec or for the blueprints and for the quality of product. Well, now we analyze the concrete. We realize that the person who poured it is a differential in terms of the quality of the concrete.
Right.
Now we know, because we've certified this document, we can go back, we have traceability to say that our purchase order was this quantity and this quality. And now we see that what was put in was not the same quality. So it gives a huge tactical advantage from an evidence perspective to lead in those lawsuits and be recouped for any maluse or malicious intent someone else may have had against you. So you're right. Verification does not mean that we've gone and hand checked everything. That's nearly impossible. And there's already fraud that happens. We've seen it through the years of people using the wrong materials just to cut corners or doing cheap work. You can never fully protect against those until we're Orwellianly surveilled 24/7 and all that's recorded. But hopefully we don't get to that point. But in the end, having it in a blockchain technology still gives you a huge amount of trust and traceability that will give you a huge advantage in any of those legal aspects.
Right. And now that we've posed the verification as an incomplete solution, because you're verifying the state of the information and not necessarily the quality, one potential solution is attestation. So when that document is verified by the blockchain, if there's some sort of digital identity, let's say a certified and licensed attorney or a building inspector or a civil engineer who is signing off on that document, then what happens as we go back and we look at the state of the document is we can have accountability. So assuming that the person who signed off on it is correct and that they're doing their job correctly, then we could trust the quality of that information. It's not just a document at a current state, but we assume that when it was at that state, it was correct because someone who understands that document or data set, whatever, signed off on it and they approve of it and they confirm the authenticity. And except when there is possible collusion, going back to if we were signing a document, some sort of contract, and we were colluding and intentionally doing something inaccurate, this form of attestation is pretty reliable. And if in the off chance that we cannot rely on that, there's still consequence, because now we can say not only was the original information inaccurate, and we can look back and see the original state of the document as it was confirmed, but we can see who was responsible for that. First for the creation of that, and then for the attestation. And this creates so much accountability that currently does not exist in so many large industries, whether that's legacy or some of the social media use cases that we were talking about. If there's information that's being distributed or pictures or video, and there's attestation that goes along with that, then we have a lot more trust of that. And if we find out later it actually was inaccurate, well, then hopefully we can enact the proper consequences of just wondering and twiddling our thumbs about who came up with this and who should be in trouble for lying or committing fraud.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. The attestation works is a great thing, is being able to actually attribute to someone with the traceability aspect, right? Not having something locked in a series of emails that you can't get access to until you're doing due diligence and requesting information through the courts to get authority to get it. Having it as a central place where you can trace all of this information, and even going into the work you do, you can combine additional sensor data and information data collected around a property, so you get a more holistic view that is as trustable as possible. I think it's one of the best use cases of blockchain technology as a whole.
Certainly. And I think that it introduces efficiencies as well. If we no longer have to re-verify or recertify information because we can look back at information and see that it's still in its original state as it was signed off by a certified individual, and we trust that, because it's blockchain based, and this is an immutable decentralized ledger, then theoretically I could proceed with making a decision based off of that document, that information, without having to audit or, well, actually this acts as a spot audit because it's telling you right there that it's still in its original state, but going through a lengthy audit process, we no longer have to do that. We don't have to bring in third parties. We don't have to re-authenticate something and essentially start by mistrusting the other party. This brings trust to the table right away, and we can look at that and say, okay, we're on the same page. I know that this is the same information as it was. And again, that's a neutral stance. And this is what I want to reiterate. Just because something is verified doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct, but it does say that it's in the same state as it previously was, whether
Yes.
that's good or bad. It's good if it's accurate, and then we still get to act off of accurate information. And it would be bad if it were inaccurate, and then we're trusting that inherently because it's verified, and then we act on that. But at least we can go back and trace that and say, okay, this was not correct. Now there needs to be some sort of consequence. We inherited bad information. It was not our fault. Now we can prove that.
Yeah, absolutely. Having a central point where everyone can agree upon something and having it in a way that cannot be altered creates that form of trust. So like you said, it would drastically reduce auditing, because instead of having to go from a perspective of this is all fake, we have to go and hand check every line. We know at least that everything on the blockchain was accurate and representative of the understandings of all parties at the time they took the action. And you can start from there. And having that is a huge groundwork already built for any form of investigation, audit, or traceability check.
Right. And this brings us to governance. How do you think that blockchain for verification is going to force firms to rethink governance? This is no longer just a technology in the stack, but it is a new tool for audits, compliance, whether that's internal controls or regulatory. How should companies be changing their mindset about blockchain, knowing that it has this potential to offer immutable decentralized governance?
Well, I think that in most organizations where it requires high trustability in the ability to audit what they're working on, they need to start seeing blockchain as an infrastructure component, not just a tool. Like, this is not a add-on tool that you're bringing into it. I think that we're going to get start getting to a world, especially because there's so much additional fraud. Like I said, because of the new era of AI, you're not getting those Nigerian scams anymore. You're getting very robust scams where people are even using AI to make fictitious voices, to fake people's faces on video calls, etc. And so seeing blockchain as a trust infrastructure in the era of AI, I think is going to be absolutely critical. I think they need to focus on not just are we adding this to our product stack, but how are we solidifying trust and truth in the AI era now that we know that it is so easy for any non-technical malicious actor to use some of these more powerful tools to do things that are disruptive. It used to be hard to modify a document and make it look well. Now I can throw a document into ChatGPT and it comes out with a perfect replica of exactly what I'm trying to, make it look like.
Right.
So now entering the world where we will need trust infrastructure because of the surplus of information, the surplus of easily generated fictitious information. I think they need to start seeing blockchain as how do we do this from a security and trust perspective in so that now that we're entering into this world, you want to have the advantage of being the at initial starting point trustable organization.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we're going to start seeing integrations with this directly into government. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 years we start seeing blockchain technologies for tracking transactions built into government infrastructure itself. And so all it would be was chain to chain linking, saying like, here's the government's official report of this property ownership, or the title change. And then that's being fed directly into a property record in someone else, in a private blockchain for owning that property if they're looking to invest or develop it.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal example. Well, it's really interesting that you bring up the property, the registrar of deeds becoming tokenized, essentially, where they're going to use blockchain verification for potential property ownership. And it leads me to a question about federal versus fragmented solutions for this, because perhaps I'm receiving a document that claims that it's been verified by a third party or blockchain that I'm not familiar with. And that sort of fragmentation without standardization introduces even more friction, because we're not quite sure if I can trust this source, and then I'm going to go back and check anyways. So how do you think that we should approach standardization of solutions like this? Should it be handled by the federal government or state governments? Should there be standards bodies and frameworks? How do we ensure that whatever solution for verification is being rolled out makes this process seamless as opposed to chaotic?
So that is actually a really huge challenge. We do obviously think anything top down is always good from a governance perspective, but it's not necessarily good for a political perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We already see a lot of states' rights issues and how things are managed, but we are seeing things like the federalized ID, where everything has that little star in the corner,
Right.
verified at each state. Each, even if it's individual state structures, it has a federal seal that it is verified from the federal process of your identification. So I think that we're probably going to see a hybrid. I think that we're going to see a federal level, here's the core components that everything needs to have, and then you'll see the state level of, okay, now that we have that, is it formatted in our proper way? And one of the big advantages is we do live in the AI era, and AI is very good at translating those kind of pieces of information. And because blockchain tracking for things like documents is rather inexpensive, you could always do a two-state storage where it's saying, hey, we have a blockchain here that's having, we have this document. We're having a record of importing that document in its original state. And then we're having a conversion to our unified private system so that our system can analyze and get the data correctly. But I think that's going to be a bit of a hybrid approach. And that's purely for the way that our government is structured. I don't think we'll ever see a full federal standard of something like a property deed. I think that's very much going to be state level controlled, or even down to county level. But I do think that there will be a federal standard of the minimum requirement of information, and then a county to state level regulation about the formatting and structure and maybe additional data points that they want to capture. But again, because we live in the AI era, it's very easy to ingest a document and then reformat that document into a structured format that works for yours. I think holistically, from an AI perspective, we're going to see a lot more bespoke solutions versus the era, like the SaaS era of everyone's using a unified product with slight modifications. I think we're going to move very much to bespoke and individualized solutions because we can now outsource some of that unsurety to AI.
Okay. That's an interesting stance on the topic. So you think we're going to gravitate towards bespoke solutions. Why do you think that's a strength this time around?
I don't necessarily know if it's a strength. I do believe it's not a weakness. It's
Okay.
partially because there is always a huge struggle of fitting, a big circle into a square box, right? So if you have something that just doesn't quite fit your needs for your organization, it's really great to have something highly tailored. There's whole companies that exist for doing application modification for some of these big SaaS providers. And so and now that we're able to build like individualized tools that get directly to your needs and answer those direct questions, the market will have a general impact on things. If you see that, hey, your investors are asking for X, it will be very easy for you to add X or for things to grow and improve and, naturally build versus having bespoke solutions that everyone has to fit into their systems. So that's why I think bespoke as a whole will be a benefit. I also think it will accelerate progress in a lot of these technologies. Part of the issue we've always had is adoption, right? So how do you adopt these kind of innovative technologies if these large, governments don't have them, or if large orgs don't have like a unified process? Now that we're entering an era where we can make translative or transformative processes to go from one system to another, it will drastically increase adoption for these technologies, and I'm very excited to see that.
Okay. Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that. Just to do a quick recap of the conversation that we've had so far. So we're talking about blockchain as a verification tool, whether that's storing information on a blockchain or connecting outside information to a blockchain. However way you want to string it, you can rely on this technology because it is generally immutable and decentralized. That's really good for auditability and traceability. Now, there are some potential weaknesses posed here, which is that if we are verifying information, we are not necessarily verifying the quality of the information, just the state of the information. However, long term, this has its benefits because we can go back and look at whether something was accurate or inaccurate at that time and at least have countability. Think of it as evidence where it could incriminate someone or could exonerate them. Now, one thing that firms need to be thinking about is the implementation of this because it's not just a technology. These are governance terms. So you have to put a plan in place of how this is going to change how people and information and systems interact with one another. Now, one thing that's going to shape that decision, and I bring this up because people like Rob and I are actively shaping that discussion, is the frameworks and standards that will be introduced to ensure that firms are not verifying based off of their own terms, but we're working with something that's interoperable. Because the idea of verifying with the blockchain falls apart if we don't trust the blockchain. So we need solutions that are reliable. We need systems and interfaces that can be trusted, especially at an institutional grade. Rob, did I miss anything?
No, I think you nailed all the points in my head.
Well, fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing how this gets rolled out. I know that you've been working on this as a media solution. We're in the built environment and infrastructure and very excited about how it's going to add so much transparency and some efficiencies as well as we start to trust each other a little bit more often. As usual, I'll have your information in the show notes. People can go check that out. And I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some of your knowledge.
Anytime. I always love talking with you.
Awesome. Me too. All right. Take care.